So let's talk about Symfony and Drupal. So what we're going to cover is we're going to talk about what is Symfony, and spoiler, it's a bunch of different components. So we're going to talk about the components overview of Symfony. And we're going to talk about some new configuration formats that have been introduced because of Symfony. And then we're going to explore Drupal 8's file structures. So all of this is, I'm going to throw a bunch of new stuff at you that's not super important, because after lunch, we're going to start using all of this to make a bunch of different Drupal stuff. And it's going to come together, I hope, why we're laying this foundation for object-oriented, inheritance, YAML. It'll make sense. So what is Symfony? So Symfony is a 3-in-1 framework, which is their words, not mine, meaning it can help your custom application in 3 different ways. And it's sort of up to you to choose how you want to use Symfony. So it can be a full stack. It can be a framework for your application. You can install all of Symfony, and you can use it to build an app on top of by customizing it or adding new pieces of your own. Or it can be brick by brick, meaning that you're going to take half of it. I'm going to use just these parts of Symfony, and then I'm going to glue those parts together, and that will be my application. And also they say it's a micro framework. You can just use some of the components here and there throughout your app, which the distinction between brick by brick and micro framework, it's kind of murky, but this is what they wanted to say about it. So here's what Symfony says about itself. Yes, so 2 slides from now, we will look at the components that are Symfony provided components. So how Drupal uses it. So let's talk about what is Drupal, Symfony in relation to Drupal. Considering all those options, Drupal is a brick by brick use of Symfony, meaning that we're going to use as much of it as we can that does not get in the way of the Drupalisms we want to keep. So in Drupal 7, 90% of Drupal 7 was a bunch of Drupal made up stuff. Like we're going to define an array, and the way that array works is something we invented in 2008, and that's how that array works for the past 10 years. But in Drupal 8, we're moving away from a lot of the Drupalisms into these standard things, and we've decided that Symfony's version of these standards, such as a routing system, are the ones that we're going to go with. So what this means is that not all of Drupal 8 is Symfony, but a lot of the foundation is. And when I say the foundation, I mean a lot of the fundamentals behind making a request to the server and returning your web page back to the browser is Symfony. And a lot of components make up that one sort of foundation. And there's a few other components that we use throughout to simplify some of the repetitive things we do in Drupal, such as providing metadata to the system. Yes. Laravel actually uses Symfony components. Laravel is a PHP framework, and it's a framework built on top of Symfony. Drupal 8 is built on top of Symfony. Symfony is the entirety of it, I guess, and it's built on top of Symfony. There's a lot of different things that use Symfony components. Okay, so next question. Considering Drupal 8's API, the massive surface area that is the API, what is Symfony and what is Drupal? So here's a list as of, I think, 2 years ago, all the components Symfony provides. And I certainly do not know all of these. But some of them are pretty obvious, like HTTP kernel and HTTP foundation. These are part of the request response. So when a browser requests your website, and the response the web server provides back to you. YAML is basically a parser for a file type that is YAML that looks like JSON, but basically somebody decided JSON wasn't good enough and that they're going to make their own. And that person was Fabian. And that thing is called YAML. So additionally, let's see, file system is just, finding files on the web server. It's got its own form system. It's got a debugger, dependency injection container, class loader, config management, console. Okay, so here's what all Symfony has. And here's what Drupal uses. Oh man, is that all washed out? Basically. All right, so I'll point to each one. So Drupal uses the class loader, the console, CSS selector. So that's like using PHP to select certain CSS elements within HTML. The dependency injection container, the event dispatcher, the HTTP foundation and kernel, which is the request response. Process, not sure about that. Routing, which is actually part of, works in conjunction with the kernel. This contains, this is, basically the request path to controller type logic, I believe. Serializer, which is just converting like objects into JSON or arrays into JSON or XML. Translation, not too familiar on that. I'm sure it has to do with translations. Validator, not sure where that's used either. Probably just testing, is this an email address type, simple validations of data sets. And YAML, which is parsing that YAML file. Yes, all of these components are PHP. And Drupal has picked these to add to it to lay a foundation for Drupal 8. So you don't necessarily have to use all of these throughout, but when you're working in Drupal, you're going to find that a few classes, such as like the request object and response object and route matching type stuff, they're going to be Symfony classes. So their namespaces are going to be Symfony HTTP Foundation request, Symfony HTTP Foundation response, that sort of thing. And this is overview stuff, not like going to make or break your career. So new configuration formats. Now we're talking about make or break your career. So these two are going to come up, and there's one you should be super familiar with, which is YAML, and that is how we have decided to provide metadata up into the Drupal 8 system, is with the YAML format. And annotations is another way in which we provide metadata up to the system. And by the system, I mean Drupal 8. And by metadata, I mean like .info files and hook menu type stuff. And I'll get into more of that after lunch. But just know that we're going to talk about YAML and annotations right now, just to get an overview of what it looks like. And after lunch, we're going to use the heck out of it. YAML means YAML ain't markup language, which if you like recursive acronyms, that one's for you. I'm not a fan, because I feel like that's just confusing for the sake of confusing. But it basically means that its name defines what it is not. How useful is that? I would say zero useful. It's a component provided by Symfony, and basically it's just a parser that parses a text file. And that text file expects a certain format, just like JSON. And what the component does is it parses that text file and it converts it into PHP arrays or strings or whatever type of object is expected. So in Drupal 8, we use YAML in a lot of places in place of what used to be hooks for things like defining new structures with the system. So say hook block info, if you've ever written a custom block in Drupal 8, was just a hook where you return an array that's got some words in it. And that defines a new block. Hook menu is an array, you return an array with like a path and a callback. And so in Drupal 8, a lot of those functions that were hooks, where you just returned an array of metadata to Drupal so that it knew what to do with things, have been converted into YAML files. And this is good, frankly, because we're writing less PHP that's just returning text, and instead we're just writing text that gets parsed by PHP. So here's sort of what it looks like. some syntax, and you'll see what I mean by like JSON but not. So a string, so you define a variable or property, I suppose, by just giving its name and a colon. And then a string has quotation marks around it. And an integer doesn't. And Booleans expect true and false. You can have list, which is their word for arrays, but also it's about the same, list and arrays. And there's two different syntaxes for this. You can follow like that classic PHP array looking syntax where you got brackets and strings and commas. Or you can indent one and put a dash. And this is one item in the list, and this is a different item in the list. Two different syntaxes for the exact same thing, convenience. And then you have structures, which are like just objects. And all it is nesting more data. So if you continue to indent and nest, you're creating structures. Note that there's no end-of-line delimiter. There's no comma at the end of the line. There's no semicolon, anything like that. You just move to the next line. Here is where YAML files are used commonly throughout Drupal 8. And I'll show you better YAML files. This is all overview stuff. So all the info files from your custom module and themes are now YAML files. Listing routes, which are paths that lead to pages. The libraries your module uses, such as CSS or JavaScript. Permissions. You used to have hook permission. Now you have a permissions.yaml file. Menu links, instead of hook menu, you've got YAML files. Services a module provides, which we'll look at services after lunch. Schema definitions and configuration management. Configuration management is how you package up your changes to a site and deploy it somewhere else. So if you've ever used features in Drupal 7, that concept is now in core called configuration management. This is just some places we use YAML. And actually, before I go any further, I'm going to show a YAML file just so you can see what a real one looks like. Sure. I mean, it's pretty straightforward, right? Let's find one that's less straightforward. No, that's still pretty straightforward. Here we go. All this green is just comments, so you can add comments to your YAML file. But let me get rid of this, so you can just see. Like we have a top level name of a property. In this case, it's services. We'll get into that. Then I indent one, and I've got another name that defines a new structure. And then inside of that, I indent. I've got a class, which is just the name of a property. The name of this value is class. And then I've got a list whose name is tags. And that list is a list of objects. So, I mean, basically, if you're comfortable with JSON, then you're 5 minutes away from being comfortable with YAML. It's not complicated. It's not even fancy. It just looks a little different. Any questions on YAML? All right. Now the other format we need to concern ourselves with is annotations. But this isn't going to come up that much. We're going to talk about it after lunch. But annotations are another way in which our custom code can provide metadata up to Drupal 8, the greater system. Just like how we use YAML files to provide data about our module that is automatically parsed by Drupal so that we don't have to write PHP. Annotations is another way of doing that. And what annotations do is they register classes of specific types to Drupal. So lots of plugins, which is a new concept in Drupal 8. In Drupal 8, a plugin is a class that does a specific thing. It's confusing because in WordPress, a plugin is a module. But in Drupal, a module is a module, and a plugin is just like a tiny part of a module. But the plugin system uses annotations, and they're pretty straightforward. And some other things we use annotations. But let's look at what those look like. Well, they look like docbox is what they look like. So this is an annotation written above a class. You see that @ symbol and some name, and then sort of a function, sort of parentheses going on. And then inside those parentheses are some properties with values. This is what an annotation looks like. They can be very complicated in the sense to where they have a lot of values, but the syntax is pretty straightforward. And what happens here is that Drupal knows it has a bunch of these specific annotations by name registered, and it knows to go look for, to discover things that use these annotations and automatically register them with the system. So I've got some better examples probably. No, not in this slideshow. Let's look at a better example. Close some of this. So let's look at my example for a block, some custom blocks type situation. Just when you thought bigger fonts were better. So this is the annotation for a block class that provides a new block type to Drupal. The annotation expected is @block and parentheses, and then the baseline of what I need to define a new block in Drupal is an ID for that block, and a label is useful for the administration screen. This is automatically discovered by Drupal 8, and this replaces hook block info. So annotations like YAML files use similarly to replace the need of writing a bunch of PHP hooks, and that's their value in Drupal 8. And really, that's sort of their value in general, I would say. So annotations in general are a Symfony thing, and so you will find them outside of the Drupal world. And just know that if you see this syntax, it means that the system is doing something automatically with this. It's uncomfortable that it looks exactly like a doc block, but has programmatic meaning.
Even if you're not block content in that, it's like part of the doc.
Yes, it is a part of the doc block. You can write all the comments you want above it. Yes.
I missed part of what you were saying.
Okay.
Due to my own distraction. So I know we're saying it looks like doc block. I understand the annotations part of it, but I just want to make sure that what I'm looking at is what I think it is. So when you're saying you're defining a block here, as an example, is this a block in the Drupal sense of block, like in Drupal 7, where a block is a section of the page?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, this is specifically a custom block type that we'll look at after lunch. And I brought this up because I thought it was better than the one in the slideshow. Yes. So this is how you write a custom block in Drupal 8. You define a new class, you extend the block base, you pop that annotation at the top, and you're ready to go. No hook block info, no hook block view. All of it's sort of now simplified into these different elements.
Are we allowed to applaud right now?
Sure, yeah. Only if you're applauding Drupal.
Yeah, no, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a complete working block in Drupal 8. Yeah.
So much easier.
Yeah, in Drupal 7, to have a block that's configurable with a form, you had 6 or 7 different hooks you had to write. And so now that's all one class with an annotation at the top. All right. So let's look a little bit more at the Drupal file structure, just in case. So it has changed from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8. So it used to be that all of Drupal core's files were right here at the top level. So miscellaneous and the modules folder were Drupal core modules, and the themes folder were Drupal core themes. Well, all of Drupal core has now been packaged up and thrown into the core folder. Now all of these top level folders are your website. They're no longer Drupal core. So modules here at the top level are modules that you've downloaded to your website. Sites is still your file system where users upload files and where you'll put your settings.php file. Vendor, outside of core, is where Symfony and all your other downloaded components live. Themes are your site's custom themes. This is much cleaner now, where if you need to replace Drupal core, it's no longer mixed into your website, but it's just this one folder. You just replace that folder and you're done. Yeah. Yes, yes, a lot, especially from a file system perspective, much easier. And I mean, to back up, yeah, to back up your site, you just need these folders and cores on its own. It's just better. It's just cleaner all around. So that's just sort of an overview of the top level of Drupal 8's file structure. It's changed in positive ways, in my opinion. A module, a custom modules file structure has changed a little bit, but it's mostly the same. So you still define a, so what used to be module name.info is now module name.info.yaml. Simple enough. Same sort of things exist, the name of your module, the description. The optional module entry point is still module name.module, still optional. Additional metadata is stored right here. It's the module name underscore. This star means whatever, so like links.menu, links.action.yaml, services.yaml, so all that's here. All your YAML files will be at the top of your module, your custom module folder. Source is where you're going to put your classes. Templates is where you're going to put custom templates. Basically, the rest of this is like, so test is where you'll put automated tests for your module. Config is YAML files for your module's installation values and or just sort of its data types for different settings. And JS, CSS is out here. Basically, the main thing to understand is that all your PHP classes that will get auto-loaded are in source. The rest of it's sort of like Drupal 7. Sort of an overview. We'll make a module after lunch. And I believe that's lunch. Any questions? It's 11:53.